Sunday School. We are continuing our series on fruit, even though it's Advent, because a lot of the fruits of the Spirit and Advent themes overlap anyway, so why not just keep going? We'll make a Christmas fruit cake with our Sunday School series. So, today's fruit is goodness. Goodness. Today's fruit is goodness. Let's go ahead and read that scripture. But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. There is no law against things like this. That's from Galatians 5:22. Again, today's theme is goodness. What is goodness? Once again, it's another word that we already know what goodness means. I feel like good is probably one of the first words we learn as a baby. But you'd be surprised by the dictionary definition. I went to look up the dictionary definition of goodness, and it wasn't very helpful because it has an S on the end, which just makes the word good a noun. And so it just says the quality or state of being good. Very helpful. Used interjectionally or in phrases, especially to mild surprise or shock. Goodness! And the nutritious, flavorful, or beneficial part of something. Fruit. So, having goodness as a fruit of the Spirit is, meaning that we taste good. Anyways, so I thought, well, goodness isn't that helpful. So let's look up the dictionary definition for good. When I looked up the dictionary definition for good, it was very, very long. And it's all the things you'd expect, virtuous and, nice and kind and bountiful and fertile and right and commendable and benevolent and competent and very... you can't really learn anything from this dictionary definition of good. It's we try to define the word specifically and it's just impossible because it has so many different meanings and so many different ways that it's used. So I thought, you know what I could do? I could go see what Greek word is used in Galatians. So I went digging and I found that the Greek word in this passage for goodness is Agathos, which I had to look up how to pronounce correctly. Agathos is used for goodness, and that's the Greek version of it is shown right here. We're able to specify what kind of good we're talking about, and so the meaning of Agathos, of good constitution or nature, useful, salutary, good, pleasant, agreeable, joyful, happy, excellent, distinguished, upright, honorable. So if I were to pick from these kind of meanings what goodness might mean in this Galatians passage as a fruit of the Spirit, I'd probably go good-natured, useful, excellent, and honorable, I would say. That aligns with my sense of doing good. Because I tend to associate, goodness with righteousness and doing the right thing. And then I learned that there may be several more, I'm not really sure, because I studied Hebrew in seminary, not Greek, so everything I'm doing is just Googling. So take all this with a grain of salt, because I could be silly. So I also found the Greek word Kalos, which I also had to Google how to pronounce correctly. And Kalos is also a Greek word that gets translated as good, but not in Galatians, not in the Fruits of the Spirit passage. And so I wondered, well, why did they pick Agathos instead of Kalos? Kalos. Agathos. So Kalos, kind of beautiful, handsome, excellent, good in characteristics, praiseworthy, beautiful, praiseworthy, agreeable, comforting, confirming. The word that comes up over and over when I've looked around at different sources for the meaning of the word kalos is beautiful and aesthetically nice. It's goodness that looks good, if that makes sense. And so I wondered, we use this one word agathos and this other word kalos, and agathos is the one that gets used to describe a fruit of the Spirit. So looking at these words and making this discovery of Agathos and Kalos, I wondered, like, why, okay, how come we chose Agathos over Kalos in the scripture to describe fruits of the Spirit? And I think if we very much oversimplify it, to be good doesn't mean to be good looking. So commonly in our culture, we often associate, beauty with goodness and evil with ugliness. Like you see it in movies all the time. Like the first example that pops to my mind is Hunchback of Notre Dame. Like everyone assumes Quasi Modo is evil and bad because he has a deformity and doesn't look like everybody else, but it turns out he's actually good. And so I think Hunchback of Notre Dame actually gives us a good idea about Kalos and Agathos. Quasi Modo embodies Agathos, just that persistent goodness that comes from within. And, like, all the other people who are assumed to be good because they look, quote-unquote, normal, are the ones who are associated with Kalos, because since they, look good from the outside, they must be good on the inside, right? Another way that you can find meaning in this is that you want to make sure that your goodness comes from within. Like the goodness in you, you're not just performing in order to look good from the outside and get everyone to think that you're a good person based on what they see when they look at you or watch you. You want that goodness to come from within, so that it doesn't matter how it looks. You know that you are always being good and doing the right thing because you've nurtured that inside of you. You're not just performing so that other people will think that you're good. And really, maybe you're not. Anyways, that was the absolute Greek wormhole I fell down today when I was trying to think about what to talk about for the idea of goodness, because goodness. I think another thing to talk about in terms of goodness is the ancient Greeks loved their boy Plato, the philosopher. You can Google him if you don't know who he is, but he'll eventually come up in your schooling education because he always does. He always shows up. Plato came up with the idea of, it's called the metaphor of the cave, where basically everyone who lives on the world is living in a cave. Like, we're not out in the bright daylight. We are actually living in a cave. And there's a puppet master who, has a light set up, and so he's shining this light, and there's little shadows moving around on the cave walls, and we're all just kind of, watching it, and we're seeing shadows. And we're thinking that all these shadows are the real thing, but the real things are actually out behind us in the light, and we can't see them as they are in reality. And so the idea is that, maybe this Platonic idea that Plato had is that nothing that we see in life is truly perfect. There's no true perfection. All of the most perfect things exist in, a realm or a reality that we cannot see, and all we see really are shadows of it. And so the reason that this relates to our ideas of Agathos and Kalos is that Agathos is thought to be that kind of Platonic ideal of goodness. The goodness that you can't see, but you can definitely see shadows of it, or reflections of it. So when we're talking about goodness as a fruit of the Spirit, I think maybe what Jesus is trying to tell us is that we have to nurture that perfect and ideal Agathos, that perfect and ideal goodness within ourselves. Agathos is the goodness you can't necessarily see on the outside, like Kalos. But it's the goodness that starts on the inside and moves its way all the way out. And so you've heard the phrase, beautiful inside and out. That's kind of what that means. I think if you call somebody beautiful inside and out, they're kind of embodying both Agathos and Kalos. But if you have Kalos by itself, the outer goodness, it's not as good as if you have Agathos, which is the more important one. Because Jesus mentions it as a fruit of the Spirit. And that is my theory about goodness. If you want something to mull over and ask questions about and think about this week, I think you could ask the question, do people have an inherent sense of goodness? Are people born with it? Or kind of like morals. Does every human have an inner sense of what's right and what's wrong? Because I know sometimes when people do despicably evil things, it makes me wonder, like, were they not born with that sense of right and wrong? Like, I feel like I have this internal sense of goodness, and I know what to do that's good and what not to do that's evil. And so that's a question that pretty much every human asks at some point, and it's a good one for you to think on. Just to figure out what you think about it. I don't know that there's an answer. I mean, a lot of people would say that there's an answer, but we don't really know. I would like to think that every single human has that inherent sense of goodness built into them, and maybe it is the evils that surround us that kind of wear that down in a person and cause them to become callous and lose their goodness and start to do evil things. But I don't really know because I only have my own experience to look at. In my own experience, I still think I'm pretty good on the inside. That concludes our Sunday school lesson on goodness as a fruit of the Spirit. So go and be good on the inside as well as on the outside. Be good. Love y'all!